Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyen Books video and audio live streaming series and podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and I'm just delighted and honored today about our guest, Fritjof Capra. Before we get into his introduction, Banyen Books would like to acknowledge that although we have people, joining from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyen Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyen's podcasts and event series are free, and we welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below. Also letting our live audience know that towards the end of our conversation today, we'll be taking your questions for Fritjof Capra. So please go ahead and type those in on the YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Fritjof Capra, Ph.D. is a physicist, systems theorist, educator, and international best-selling author whose work bridges science, philosophy, and social change. Over decades, he has explored paradigm shifts across disciplines, culminating in The Systems View of Life, a book that came out in 2014, which is a synthesis of biology, cognition, and ecology. A founder of the Center for Ecoliteracy and a Fellow of Schumacher College, Capra has taught at leading universities and been featured in the BBC's Beautiful Minds. His extensive body of work includes books like The Web of Life and The Hidden Connections, and has earned him global recognition, numerous honorary degrees, and prestigious awards. He's a passionate advocate for ecological literacy and believes nature's principles hold the key to building sustainable communities. And today, Banyen Books were honored to be in conversation with him, celebrating the 50th anniversary of his pioneering and now classic book, The Tao of Physics, an exploration of the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism. This influential book brought the mystical implications of subatomic physics to popular consciousness for the very first time, bridging the worlds of science and spirituality. A message of timeless importance, the Tao of Physics continues to inspire and challenge, offering profound insights into the interconnectedness of all life. And I have a quote for you about this book. I have been reading the book with amazement and the greatest interest, recommending it to everyone I meet and as often as possible in my lectures. I think you have done a magnificent and extremely important job. And that quote is someone I don't get to quote often about a book. That's the Revered legendary Joseph Campbell. The 50th anniversary edition of this book is now available through Shambhala Publications and features a new preface, afterword, and postscript by Capra. For those of you who prefer, Banyen Books carries the previous edition in stock. You can get it at banyen.com. Our honored guest's website is fritjofcapra.net. Banyen community, please join me in a warm welcome for Fritjof Capra.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for this very nice introduction. Let me just add one detail, and that is that my textbook, The Systems View of Life, was co-authored by Pierluigi Luisi, a close friend and colleague. And I'm particularly, I say this with some emotion because Pierluigi died a few weeks ago, and we were very close friends, and I miss him dearly. So I want to honor his memory here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry. My condolences.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Now,
very happy to be in this circle with Banyen Books, and maybe I should say to be with Banyen Books again, because I think I gave a lecture at the store when the Tao of Physics came out, or shortly after that.
wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that would have been the original location. And the current location is not far from there in Kitsilano.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very neat. Can you tell us a little bit about the conception of this book? In the original preface to the book, you tell the story of an expansive experience at the beach that helped you see the connection between the new physics and Eastern mysticism. Was that the first time you had that realization?
Well, the parallels between the concepts of modern physics and the basic ideas in Eastern mysticism occurred to me about 2 years earlier. This was my first postdoc job as a young Ph.D. in theoretical physics, and I spent the first 2 years in Paris. And it was in Paris that I read books about Buddhism and Hinduism and books by D.D. Suzuki. I read the Bhagavad Gita. That was my first actual Eastern text. And I almost immediately realized there were some significant parallels. And the first time I realized it was when I read about the Zen koans. The Zen koan is a kind of instruction method where the Zen master presents to the disciple an enigmatic puzzle, a paradox, and the student is asked to solve this not rationally, but from a different state of mind, from an altered state of consciousness, and thereby approach spirituality. And that reminded me very vividly about something I had read in a book written by Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum theory. And this book is called Physics and Philosophy and had a tremendous influence on my whole life and whole trajectory as a scientist. It came out in the late 50s, and I read it first as a student in Vienna when I was studying physics there. And Heisenberg describes in this book very vividly how a handful of physicists for the first time explored the atomic and subatomic world and found a world full of mystery, full of paradoxes, full of challenges. And this was for them not only an intellectual crisis, but also an emotional and even existential crisis. So I had read this many years before I read about the Zen instruction technique. But when I read about Zen Buddhism, I immediately thought about Heisenberg and the puzzles in physics. But the experience on the beach in California, which I now call my epiphany on the beach, happened in the late summer of 1969. And it was not an intellectual recognition of the parallels, but an actual experience. I was meditating on a beach in the late afternoon and, trying to harmonize my breathing with the waves that were coming in. And all of a sudden, I experienced my entire environment being engaged in a gigantic cosmic dance. Now, as a physicist, I knew that the rocks and the sand and the water and the air were all composed of vibrating molecules and vibrating atoms. And I also knew that inside those atoms and inside the nuclei were subatomic particles continually created and destroyed. But I had known this from diagrams and mathematical theories, and there on the beach, I really experienced it. In a sense, I felt it, I saw it, I heard it. And at this time, I realized the significance of this Indian metaphor of the dance of Shiva, the cosmic dance, Shiva Nataraja. So that was the first experiential approach to the parallels.
I kind of picture you like Newton with the apple falling on his head in that moment.
Well, maybe that's a big compliment. I wouldn't go that far, but it was career changing. And shortly after that, I designed a photomontage of a dancing Shiva from the Indian statues and particle tracks in subatomic particle chambers, in so-called bubble chambers. And as you can see behind me, the original photomontage is still in my office. I've had it all those 50 years, and it had really a strong influence on me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the dance of subatomic particles and how it relates to Shiva's cosmic dance?
Well, according to Hindu mythology, the universe is forever in motion, is forever dancing, and it is a dance of creation and destruction. So as you know, these Shiva statues have 4 arms, and in one arm, Shiva holds a drum, the symbol of creation, and in the other hand, he holds a flame, the symbol of destruction. And so there's a continuous interplay between creation and destruction. And that is true in the subatomic world, where the forces are represented by particles, and the particles appear and disappear. And physicists have actually used the phrase that this is a continual energy dance. But nobody before me has made that connection with the Indian mythology and this very powerful and beautiful metaphor of the dancing god.
Now, Shiva is also associated with consciousness. Has physics come close to a satisfying view on what consciousness actually is, do you think?
No, I don't think so. And I thought a lot about physics and consciousness in the early days and when I wrote the Tao of Physics. But when I turned to the life sciences later on in the 1980s, I realized that what I now call a systems view or systemic view of consciousness has to include life, because consciousness is first and foremost a phenomenon of life. Non-living things are not conscious. Rocks are not conscious in the sense that we know and experience consciousness, in the sense of self-awareness and conceptual thought and so on. And so to me, I know there are many physicists who write and research about the nature of consciousness, but in my view, they're on the wrong track, because you have to approach consciousness as part of life. We have life, living systems, we have mind or cognition, the process of knowing, and we have special states of mind, including language and self-awareness that we call consciousness. But it all starts with life.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey after the Tao of Physics came out that kind of led you into this systems view of life that has become the major focus of your work?
Yeah. Well, it's a long journey, as you may imagine, and I'll try to make it short and get it in a few minutes. Well, the first thing you need to realize that the Tao of Physics was successful beyond my wildest expectations. So it sold well over 1 million copies, was translated into more than 20 languages, and most of these editions are still in print. And so as a consequence, my life changed dramatically. I traveled far and wide in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, lecturing about the concepts of the so-called new physics and its connection with Eastern mysticism to women and men from all walks of life. And very soon I realized that many people in the discussions we had in these lectures and seminars told me that a similar change of worldviews, of paradigms that I was describing in physics was now happening in their fields being biology, medicine, anthropology, management, economics, ecology, whatever, almost any field. Somebody would come and say, listen, in my field, this shift from a mechanistic view to a holistic and ecological view is also going on. So naturally, I became interested in these other fields. And so in the late 70s, I began to research these other fields. And I realized quite soon that the issues I became interested now in, education, social justice, healthcare, management, protection of the environment, and so on, that these all had to do with life, with individual living organisms, human beings and others, with social systems and with ecosystems. So in the mid-80s, my research interest shifted from physics to the life sciences. And around 1985, 1986, I stopped working as a physicist and concentrated on a new conception of life that I saw emerging at the forefront of science. And I, over the years and over the decades, I developed a synthesis of this new view of life, which already in my second book, The Turning Point, published in 1982, I called the systems view of life. So that's a term I used very early on, but it was not a coherent synthesis in those early years. I published, as you mentioned, The Web of Life and the Hidden Connections, all about further steps in the synthesis. And finally, the final formulation is published in this book, The Systems View of Life, that I wrote with my friend Pierluigi. So this is the trajectory, more or less.
Right. Now, in that systems view of life, I'm just quoting you here from Tao of Physics. It's a conceptual framework that integrates 4 dimensions of life: the biological, the cognitive, the social, and the ecological dimension. Can you just expand or explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the systems view refers to something called systems thinking or systems theory, which started in the 1930s and 1940s with something called general systems theory and cybernetics and ecology, which was a very young science at the time. And so it has been around for a long time. But what I am presenting in my synthesis is something quite different, and I've recently come to call it advanced systems thinking. And it's characterized in one way by the integration of these dimensions of life, the biological, obviously, but also the cognitive, the social, and the ecological. Before, nobody was really able to integrate mind and body, to integrate conceptually in a scientific framework the biological and the cognitive domain of life. And that, for me, was a struggle that took many decades. And then I first published it in the book The Web of Life in 1996. And what was missing still from that book was the social dimension. And that was another huge struggle that involved a lot of confusion and searching. And finally, 6 years later, in 2002, I published The Hidden Connection, which is the full synthesis. And what Pierluigi Luisi then added was a lot about biochemistry. He was a biochemist, and about the origin of life on Earth, which was his specialty of research. So there's a lot of new stuff in the systems view of life. Another way of characterizing this, which is in none of these books, because it's very recent thinking that I came up with out of many discussions with my students in my online course, and that is a non-technical summary of my synthesis of the systems view of life in terms of 4 principles of life. And the 4 principles of life, formulated in very ordinary everyday language, are the following. 1, life organizes itself in networks, and then these networks are inherently regenerative, creative, and intelligent. And this is really the first time, I mean, the whole synthesis that I lay out in the book is the first time that anybody could have integrated the regenerative nature of life with its creative nature and its inherent intelligence. So to me, this is a huge step.
Wow. Do the students in your online courses, do you have a real exchange with them that helps to influence your thinking processes?
Yeah, it was actually very surprising to me. The course, by the way, is called Capra course, and it's widely known as such. Capracourse.net is the website, and it's known around the world now. And what I realized was that first of all, let me tell you that I spent a lot of time preparing the lectures, and this is the best presentation I've ever given of my synthesis. And then we recorded it with a professional team. It happened to be in Brazil because I have very good connections there. So a video and design team recorded the lectures. And when we started presenting the course and people started enrolling, I started to have lots of Zoom meetings with them because, they were all over the world. So we also met in person in various regions, but mostly it was via Zoom. And I was amazed by the fact that in these Zoom meetings, that quite a lot of emotion came across. The conversations were often very emotional because people often felt isolated in wanting to experience something new, to see the world in a new way. And they were very happy and to change the world also in terms of environmental awareness and social justice and so on. And they were very happy and often very moved to meet other fellow students in the course. So the course, since the beginning, has had a discussion forum in which I participated every day in the first few years. I don't anymore. I still participate, but not as much anymore. And I realized that the questions and comments people presented in this discussion forum were often also highly emotional. And they were very moved. And then we formed an alumni network where they have study groups and they have joint projects and so on. So there have been very strong contacts and personal emotional relationships. That was a huge surprise to me. Now, mind you, this was several years before COVID. So after COVID, everybody did Zoom. And I was way ahead of the curve because I had started it years before and had more experience. And so these Zoom meetings have been surprising and very effective.
That's fantastic. Wow. You're talking about the questions from people, and there's something you touch on in the new preface about there's there's three common questions you've gotten at your lectures and seminars over the years about the Tao of Physics, even when the lecture or seminar isn't specifically focused on that.
Right.
These are kind of the three key questions. I'm wondering if we could cover those three questions right now.
My wife used to say, it doesn't matter what you speak about, they will ask about the Tao of Physics. I mean, this is exaggerated, of course. But yes, there were mainly three questions. And the first one was, in those years, has physics changed? What have been the new discoveries, the new insights, and have any of them invalidated what you wrote in the book? And so to answer this properly, I wrote an afterword in this anniversary edition, which is called The New Physics Revisited. And I go into quite some detail of new discoveries, both theoretically and experimentally. And I can say that to my great satisfaction and great joy, none of these new discoveries have invalidated my basic thesis. In fact, some of them confirmed my thesis in a very radical way. For instance, now people speak about quantum entanglement, which means that the world is much more interconnected than we had even thought. And so this quantum entanglement does not occur in the original edition of the Tao of Physics, but in this new chapter I discuss it quite extensively, and it radically confirms my thesis of the world being interconnected. There's this very beautiful quotation from an early Buddhist sage called Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna writes, "Things derive their nature and being by mutual dependence and are nothing in themselves." And that is one of the key tenets, the key points of the Tao of Physics, and has been confirmed even more in recent developments. Now, the second question is about spirituality, and people have often asked me, have my views on spirituality changed over those years? And as you would expect, they have evolved. And in particular, what I realized over the years was the great importance of distinguishing between spirituality and religion. And I realized this because when I talked to my colleagues, first in physics and then in the other sciences, about religion and religious experience, some of them said, I have no problem with religion. It can perfectly coexist with science. And others said, no, religion, that's something else. We have to keep the two separate and never the twain shall meet. And so I realized, looking into this more carefully, that this paradox occurred because many people confuse spirituality with religion. Spirituality being involving a special experience of reality, a non-ordinary experience of reality in heightened states of awareness, which is independent of cultural and historical contexts, whereas religion is a verbal interpretation, not only verbal, but also symbolic interpretation of the experience, and using the experience as moral guidelines for the religious community. And this interpretation is always affected by historical and cultural contexts. So the same spiritual experience will be interpreted differently in India and in Canada because the culture is different, and will be in different interpretations now from 1,000 years ago and so on. So anyway, I go into this in a postscript that I have written for this new edition, which is called Science, Spirituality, and Religion. And finally, the last question people naturally ask is, has the basic thesis of the Tao of Physics stood the test of time? The basic thesis being that there are significant parallels between the concepts of modern physics and the views of Eastern spiritual traditions? And I'm very happy to say the answer is a resounding yes. It has stood the test of time. There have been a whole generation of books, some of which I list in this postscript, a generation of books by authors who point out similar parallels to the ones I discuss in the Tao of Physics. Also, some authors have gone on beyond physics and found parallels between Eastern thought and the life sciences, the nature of life, of mind, of consciousness, of evolution, and so on. And there have been Eastern spiritual teachers encouraging investigation of these parallels. First and foremost, the Dalai Lama, who held a series of dialogues with Western scientists in his home and in Dharamsala. And so all of these developments, books and dialogues, conferences, and so on, have given much more force to my original thesis. So I stand on much firmer ground now.
Thank you. That's so great to hear. And that must be very affirming for you after all these years as well.
It is.
Now, I was trying to formulate a question I wanted to ask you, and then I read the exact question I wanted to ask you perfectly worded in your epilogue to the book. So I'm just going to quote you here. Is modern science, with all its sophisticated machinery, merely rediscovering ancient wisdom known to the Eastern sages for thousands of years? Should physicists therefore abandon the scientific method and begin to meditate? Or can there be a mutual influence between science and mysticism, perhaps even a synthesis? What are your thoughts on this at this point?
So why don't you read on? What do I answer?
I didn't write that part down. I thought I'd pass it over to you live.
Okay, no, thank you for bringing this up. I mean, many people have asked me that, and that's how I ended the epilogue with this really important question. And my answer is that yes, science and mysticism can coexist, can interact, can live together. And I see them, throughout the book and also throughout my second book, I very much use the framework, the Chinese framework, the yin and the yang, the feminine and the masculine, the integrative and the self-assertive tendencies of the human mind. And so I say at the very end of the Tao of Physics that human beings need both the rational mind and science to find our way in the modern world, and the intuitive mind of spirituality and mystical traditions to find inner peace, happiness, and fulfillment. So in the meeting of science and mysticism, physics and mysticism originally, this gap is bridged because we discover that when we look at the world around us as scientists, we find that we're not thrown into chaos and randomness, but are part of a great order, a great symphony of life. If you look at the material world and at the living world, you find that every single atom in our body has been part of previous bodies, living and non-living, and will be part of future bodies. And so in this sense, when we die, we do not die, we live on because life lives on. And we also realize in modern biology that we share not only life's molecules, but also its basic principles of organization, its metabolic pathways with the entire living world. So we truly belong to the universe. And this sense of belonging, this experience of belonging from either science or meditation can make our lives profoundly meaningful.
Wow. I just want to remind our live audience that we taking some questions for Fritjof in a few minutes. So please go ahead and type those into the chat on YouTube, and we'll tend to them shortly. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is chi, and I'm gonna quote something that you share in the book from the Neo-Confucians, saying it bears the most striking resemblance to the concept of the quantum field in modern physics. You quote Chiang Tsai saying, "The great void cannot but consist of chi. This chi cannot but condense to form all things, and these things cannot but become dispersed so as to form once more the great void." What is the explanation of chi in physics and void in physics?
Well, those are really different things. We have what you just quoted was the sort of grand philosophical understanding of chi as an underlying reality that pervades all space, and as we would say in modern language, an underlying energy field which condenses into the 10,000 things, as the Chinese sages like to put it, and condenses and then merges again with the great void. The other type of chi is more the flow of energy in our bodies, which is used in acupuncture with meridians and acupuncture points. And so this is a more specific meaning of chi. But the grand philosophical meaning of the relationship between the one and the many, between an underlying reality pervading all space and its manifestation in individual entities, that is a parallel that I discuss to some extent in a whole chapter of the Tao of Physics.
I was really interested in that chapter. And another thing I was interested in is in chapter 5 on Hinduism. You talk about the Western mind becoming easily confused about the number of gods and goddesses in that culture. And you write, to understand how the Hindus can cope with this multitude of divinities, we must be aware of the basic attitude of Hinduism that in substance, all these divinities are identical. They are all manifestations of the same divine reality, reflecting different aspects of the infinite, omnipresent, and ultimately incomprehensible Brahman. I'm wondering, how would physics seek to describe these divinities, do you think? Are there these archetypal energies that have been identified, kind of like laws or forces of nature? Is there anything like that that's close?
Yeah, I think so, except the divinities in these religions are more connected with lives, with attitudes of human beings, whether we talk about the Greek gods and goddesses or the Hindu gods and goddesses. So they are connected to human attitudes, human values, human weaknesses and failures, and so on. And physics doesn't really have to say anything about that. But let me also tell you, as you read this passage from my chapter on Hinduism, I was thinking of one of my teachers who taught me that. And as you read it, I really heard him and remembered the scene where he explained that to me. And this was a meditation teacher, Indian meditation teacher called Firoz Mehta, whom I mention in the book, and who lived in London he lived in London most of his life, I think, but when I was living in London in the early 70s, I met him somehow. I don't remember how, but I was very impressed by him, and I visited him regularly for about a year, and he gave me a sort of personal tutoring in Hinduism. And one of the first things he taught me was what you just read, that this bewildering variety of gods and goddesses are just different facets, different expressions of one and the same divine reality.
Fritjof, early in our conversation, you gave a little overview of your journey after the publication of the Tao of Physics. And one of the things you got involved in was environmental activism and education. And you said that was motivated by an observation you made on the final page of the Tao of Physics. And it's such a beautiful quote, and I'd like to share it. And then I have a question about that.
Okay.
You write, I believe the worldview implied by modern physics is inconsistent with our present society, which does not reflect the harmonious interrelatedness we observe in nature. To achieve such a state of dynamic balance, a radically different social and economic structure will be needed. A cultural revolution in the true sense of the word. The survival of our whole civilization may depend on whether we can bring about such a change. Do you think that those ancient societies in India and China that were built on that sort of mystical worldview can teach us something about that revolution or that change that we need?
Well, I think this is a sad story because I wrote these words 50 years ago. And when we look at the world today, you see they're ever more relevant. There's a new resurgence of violence and war, which is absolutely heartbreaking. And it seems to me that our world leaders, so-called, respond to every conflict with force, with weapons, with war, with aggression, rather than with persuasion, education, compassion, cooperation, diplomacy, negotiation, and so on. These are again the yang and yin sides of human consciousness. And so the need for a more balanced set of values and balanced set of actions is more urgent than ever 50 years later. And so I'm certainly the Eastern traditions can teach us a lot. And we should also say that in those 50 years, they have spread throughout the world. And there are now meditation groups, be they Buddhist meditation, Zen meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi, or whatever. These meditation groups exist in all countries throughout the world. And I know this firsthand because many of my students participate in them. I now, in my online course, I have an alumni network of 4,000 people around the world in 90 countries around the world. And they often have this spiritual grounding. So I think the situation is not hopeless. But at the moment, when you look at the world and at politics at the moment, it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah. Fritjof, we have some nice questions coming in from our live audience, if that's okay.
Wonderful.
There's one here from Norm. Norm says, please say something about the physics of prayer or focused thought. Is there any research on this?
Well, there is research, and it would be found in a publication called Journal of Consciousness. And there have been scientific studies of meditators and their states of mind and how to describe them and how to analyze them. I have not followed that research, but Norm will find lots of articles and resources in this journal, which is called Journal of Consciousness.
Wonderful, thanks. And thanks, Norm, for that question. There's one here from Albert who says, do you see any synthesis of your work with that of Carl Jung?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not sure now whether I wrote about Jung in the Systems View of Life. I may not have, but in the Turning Point, my first attempt at the synthesis, I have a whole section about Jung, And I realized that Jung was a systemic thinker. His whole concept of the psyche is a systemic concept. And there are lots of parallels you can draw and lots of inspiration you can draw from Jung.
Thank you. And thanks, Albert. There's one from Jonah who's wondering, is there a connection between democracy and systems thinking?
Good question. Well, you could say that in the natural world, if you look at an ecosystem in the natural world, you won't find any values there, any human values like justice or democracy and so on, because these come with consciousness and culture. But you will find patterns of organization that somehow correspond to what is often called direct democracy or grassroots democracy. So in an ecosystem, we have a network of organisms, of plants, animals, and microorganisms, and human beings, if the ecosystem includes humans. And in this network, every single species has a role to play and is involved in the well-being of the whole. And this is so because in millions and billions of years of evolution, those systems that did not respect the individual's role in the community did not survive for very long and are not around any longer. So those systems, those living networks that we observe in our ecological world today are the ones who survived because the well-being of the individual was always related to the well-being of the whole. And I have not thought about this in terms of democracy, but I think you could, with some effort, make some very significant links to direct democracy or grassroots democracy. Good subject. Thanks for the question, Jonah.
Yeah, thank you. That's the first question that I've asked you this evening, Fritjof, that you've had to stop and ponder for a minute. I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. It's good to get difficult questions, you know.
Yeah, where did your mind go? How did you make that connection? Were you remembering what you knew about what you just described, or?
Well, my mind went immediately to direct democracy, and then I started talking about the ecosystem. And while I was speaking about the ecosystem, and that happens in all my questions, you know, while I start answering, I have new ideas. So while I was speaking about democracy, I thought, of course, the concept of democracy does not exist in an ecosystem because there are no concepts in an ecosystem. There's no conceptual thought. And so I put that in, sort of sandwiched that into my answer in between, but then came back to the direct democracy. And I'm serious about that. I can't say anymore, especially not now. We've almost done the full hour and I'm getting tired. But even at the beginning, I would have do some thinking and some serious research. And I encourage people to do that because I think it's a great question.
Thanks so much. There's one here from Trudy. This is a common thing in people's minds these days. What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence and its relationship to consciousness and the web of life?
Yeah, thank you, Trudy. That's a really important question, great question. And this one, I don't have to think, and I don't have to think while I'm speaking, because it's a question I have pondered for quite some time, as you might imagine, because everybody talks about AI. Well, a while ago, I told you about my new language in terms of 4 principles of life. And the fourth principle of life is that living networks are inherently intelligent. So there is a living intelligence in all of life, and this has to do with a new concept of cognition, the process of knowing, which says that a living organism interacts with its environment in a very special way. It picks up influences from the environment to undergo structural changes, and it responds with these structural changes according to its nature and according to past experience. And so these interactions are identified as cognitive interactions, and they occur in all living systems, and therefore cognition, or if you wish, mind, Gregory Bateson called it mind, mind is inherent in life. It's the process, the basic process of life. And living intelligence is inherent in all life. Living intelligence, if you look at it a little more in detail, is always tacit and is always organically embodied. So you can't have an intelligence floating around without a biological body. It's part of the body, it's the process aspect of biology. And the main quality of this intelligence is for an organism to know how to be in the world, how to move around in it, and how to evolve in it, how to survive in it. Now, at the human level, this living intelligence includes abstract thinking, mathematical intelligence, and things we are used to from computers like algorithms, mathematical models, and so on. But this is a peripheral part of living intelligence. As my friend Francisco Varela used to say, it's the icing on the cake. It's not the part of living intelligence. And so what we're doing now is we're emphasizing and maybe overemphasizing artificial intelligence. And the danger is that we interfere with our living intelligence or wisdom of how to be in the world. If you just look at our society and ask yourself, can a society be called intelligent, a society who emphasizes making money over human well-being, and in maximizing the making of money destroys the natural environment on which human survival depends? Can such a society be called intelligent? And this is a very stark distinction here between the mathematical artificial intelligence and the living intelligence. Now, I'm not saying that AI should not be used, but we should be careful and should ask in every case, does this diminish or enhance human well-being? Because our main concern should be with human well-being and not with making money.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for just one more question from our fantastic live audience.
These are really fabulous questions.
Yeah, really nice. Thanks, everybody. The last one here is from Yael, who says, cities and urbanization seem to be pulling everyone away from a natural love of our interconnectedness with the natural world. What advice do you have for parents and teachers to address this?
Well, I don't have a personal advice for parents and teachers, but again, it's a question I've thought about a lot, and I can offer a fantastic resource. This is a book by an urban designer who used to be a professor in Berkeley. He's now retired, and his name is Randolph Hess. Randolph Hess, and the book is called Design for Ecological Democracy. And it is written for urban designers, so in parts it's quite technical. And the Randolph Hess makes his main point is that our cities are not designed to enhance community life. On the contrary, they inhibit community life, and communities are essential for democracy. And this is why he calls his approach Design for Ecological Democracy. And he goes into quite detail about how to redesign cities, not only to make them more environmentally friendly, but also to make them more friendly for democracy.
Okay,
So
that
we have
sounds like
two great questions about democracy. I'm very happy about that.
I have one final question for you, Fritjof, but I just want to tell everybody we've had the honor today of speaking to the wonderful Fritjof Capra. We've been talking about his life and work, but the central focus has been the 50th anniversary edition of his classic book, The Tao of Physics. And you can get this 50th anniversary edition from Shambhala Publications. It's not available right now in Canada. If you want the original edition, you can get that from Banyen Books, banyen.com. And I just want to say a big thanks to our audience and to our producer and events curator, Jacob Steele, as well, for everything that he does.
Yeah, I want to thank Jacob especially for selecting those fantastic questions. I know that it's not easy in chat to pick out questions, and you did a fantastic job. Thank you.
He's very skilled at that. Finally, I just want to ask you, what's your focus at this stage of your life and work? Is it your online programs?
Yes, it's the online programs. I'm 86 now, and I was actually very proud of myself a minute ago to remember Randolph Hess and the title of the book. I'm always worried in these discussions that I won't remember things, but so far it's holding up. Well, I'm still involved in my online course, but less so. I have fewer appearances, and but the course is going on. And actually, this fall course just started last week, and it has a record number of participants of over 250. So we are on for another great course, and I have a very skillful team to assist me, so I can take a little bit of a backseat. But the lectures are fabulous, and I should say that from a set of lectures, the Capra course has evolved into a community of systemic thinkers and activists. And so if our listeners want to join this community, they're very welcome to go to capracourse.net, and I can assure you it's a very beautiful experience to be in the course.
Check it out, everybody. Fritjof Capra, thank you very, very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Ross. It was a really nice conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele, and I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.